that's a market. So yes, I think the market, if we incentivize it to be, I think capitalism is evolving itself into what I like to call inclusionism. It is just happening because of that inherent demand for connectivity.
Yeah.
Everybody has been talking about connectivity for the past 5,000 years. And we've now baked it in to the mechanics of how we put value on the cluster of human lives.
Welcome to Women Disrupting Tech. My name is Dirk-Jan Upkes, and on this podcast I give the women who work in tech the platform they need to inspire and empower each other. Join me on a journey into the world of entrepreneurship, funding, biases and role models to discover the strategies for success in the tech industry. In other words, how women can disrupt tech. Are you ready to listen? Hey, welcome back to Women Disrupting Tech, and thank you for tuning in to episode 105. Let's talk about value, because in the end, that is what this episode is about. Discovering how you can be of value to others and putting a price on it. My guest in this episode of Women Disrupting Tech is James Felton Keith. James Felton Keith is an award-winning engineer and economist turned labor leader who was also the first black LGBTQ person to run for federal office in America back in 2017. James is also the CEO of Inclusion Score, and this company uses the global ISO standard for diversity, equity and inclusion to build inclusion into capitalism. How? By pricing it through insurance premiums. In this episode of Women Disrupting Tech, James and I talk about how his personal journey shaped his work at Inclusion Score, why companies are already paying for a lack of inclusion, spoiler, data is already out there, and what it takes to make DEI measurable and auditable, and why that's a long-term game. What makes this episode special to me is that I've long believed that financial incentives can support a proper implementation of inclusion in our way of doing business. So I found it magical that there is a company that makes inclusion measurable and literally puts a price on it. So when you're ready to listen and learn how we can build inclusion into capitalism, please welcome to Women Disrupting Tech, James Felton Keith. Good morning, James. Good to have you on Women Disrupting Tech. Welcome. Question I always ask at the start is how you got into your current position, and floor is yours.
Wow. How I got into my current position. Well, I started the company. I think after I finished running for Congress in 2020, I got really sick with COVID. And then I was healthy again by June. And I realized my political ambitions were shot by the pandemic. And I was trying to figure out what work I could do that both was rooted in, advocating for equity and inclusion, but also, be able to afford me, this New York lifestyle because the rent is very, very high in New York. So, uh, I went back to my my corporate roots. I used to work in insurance for years before I got into politics and policy, and I saw a rising rate of grievances from employees at companies across the globe and lawsuits really around retaliation and discrimination. And I just thought if we could tie a better auditing process, or in insurance, we call it loss prevention process, to the professional and employment and corporate liability space, then we could disincentivize bad actors in organizations of all sorts, right? And so As an economist, I'm always thinking about the incentives, the systems that we can build to disincentivize um, ill intent,
Hmm.
or even not ill intent, but just inappropriate activity in organizations, sometimes that people aren't aware of. And so I started Inclusion Score as an insurance company
Hmm.
to both distribute and deploy the new international standard for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and tied to insurance premiums. I just happen to be aware of the coming of a new international standard for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And I happen to have this background in insurance and a lot of new friends after running for office. So I thought, I could lobby them and I could call my insurance friends and see if I could tie this audit to both regulators that I lobby and insurance carriers that I want to fortify the price of doing business. So, I mean, that's how I got to this work. In doing that, I started the company. We're a venture backed startup. So, we raised some money from Techstars and some other venture capital firms. Um,
Hmm.
so my work at this point is really a culmination of maybe 20 years of corporate stuff, academic stuff, and political stuff. It would take forever to explain what the last 20 years looked like, but I think that's the shortest version of how I got here.
Okay. So how did your personal experience tie into this?
Well, I mean, my personal experience from the time that I was a kid, I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. For anyone not familiar, people from Michigan always use the hand. We're the hand looking place in the middle of the US.
Yeah.
And anyway, I ran away to New York maybe 20 years ago. But no, you grew up poor, black, queer, constantly judging or wondering if I had any real tangible value in the world. And those questions, or the lack of seeing myself either through the media or elsewhere as having tangible value in the world, from a corporate standpoint, from a political standpoint, constantly incentivized me to raise these questions about if and how I might be valuable. And so, that personal experience has really driven all of my work throughout, the past 25 years, or just really my, 45 or so years. Yeah. I mean, it's always rooted in that. I think, people do what they can per who they are. I think if I build better systems, I think becoming a professional, becoming a mechanical engineer, becoming a macroeconomist has really rooted me in building better systems. I think, bad systems can beat good people all day. Everyone
Yeah.
has, I assume, good intentions, uh, but systems just don't work. And
Hmm.
so I've spent the past 25 years trying to build better systems to help more people engage in the normal economy and enhance their quality of life. But I'm really always doing it for that 10-year-old little boy in Detroit. Yeah.
That's a powerful motivator, I would say.
Yeah, sure.
But looking back, if you're that 10-year-old Michigan boy from Detroit would look at you now, would he be proud?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if yet. It's hard with the way media works right now to assess whether you've been a success or not. Just because of how things are so far blown up. You just
Hmm.
go, if you're not Nelson Mandela, did you do well?
Yeah.
I haven't been to jail. I have not done, what Nelson Mandela did. So I think that little boy would be it's hard to remember. I think he would think I was on the right path. I think he would think I was just, doing my duty. I don't know how impressed he would be. He'd just go, "This is what you were supposed to be doing anyway." I've always kind of lived my life, even when I think about my parents and my grandparents, thinking
Hmm.
like, these are things you should be doing, for me. You had me, you brought me here.
Hmm.
I am here. Do work for me. Try to enhance my quality of life.
Hmm.
because I'm here. So I don't know. I just do the work. Uh, I think that kid would, you know, think I'm on a path. My grandparents were a bit activists, or at least my grandmother was, and so I think by the age of 10, I already had this sense of duty. So I think this is just what I'm supposed to be doing anyway. I think I'm kind of honoring her doing my job. I don't know if that's a good answer, but
Well, yeah.
but yeah, I don't know if he would be impressed.
Okay. Ah, let me put it this way. You're the first person that I talk to in 100 plus episodes who has found a way to put a price on DEI.
Sure, you know what?
Because everyone here in the Netherlands is talking about, yeah, we need to collect data. Oh, wait a minute, there's GDPR, we can't collect data. Oh, so how do we then do this? And so we're still sort of running around in circles, and you found a way to translate, let's say, a systemic concept into economics and really put a, well, as I call it, put a price on in positive or a negative sense on good implementation of DEI. So I can imagine
Sure, sure,
that that 10-year-old boy would be thinking, well, he's on a good path, but he's already done a lot
sure.
of good work.
You're right. I'm bad at reflecting. In general, and maybe I might be too hard on myself and what is actually available to be accomplished. But I also just think when I put these skill sets together, the engineer version of me, the economist version of me, I really got to economics because of my sort of fascination with power. I think and I mean that in kind of an intangible way, but engineers, they engage power in a tangible way. Like we look
Yeah.
at energy, we look at either mechanical, chemical, electrical, you know,
Hmm.
energy proliferate. We look at friction. But in my mid 20s, in the mid 2000s, as I was looking to go to grad school, I had a lot of, you know, political interactions and mentors asking me what I thought about, power, people who have power, people who have none, people who are able to distribute it to them. And so I was still thinking about these sort of energy and power scenarios, but from a value, a more intangible phenomena standpoint. And I was like, well, if we can better distribute, if we can have economists track value in the way engineers track energy,
Hmm.
then we'd be in a good place to identify gaps
Hmm.
and better distribute that. And so when I think about putting a price on a lack of inclusivity, whether people think they may or may not collect data per the GDPR in Europe, in Holland, and the broader, what is it, 28, 27 countries now, minus the UK. Um, Regardless of what they think, the data's already out there, number one. With regards to the price, I just think sometimes we're available in our generation
Hmm.
to inherit new opportunities. And so, being my age,
Hmm.
being in my profession, I think, I hope, I could be wrong about this, but I hope there would be somebody else, if I weren't available, to go, you know what, I think we can put a price on this because of the rising insurance premiums. For instance, I don't need to collect data on everyone in your country to know what the social risk is because Swiss Re, which is not an
Hmm.
American company, Swiss Re's Reinsurance Institute, they track an index called the social inflation rate. The social inflation rate, for
Hmm.
anyone who is not familiar, is the rate of litigation globally above the regular rate of inflation. So a normal social inflation rate should be about 3.5%. Right now it's 10. So that suggests that people don't like each other in the workplace, and the market for employment practice liability, for instance, should be 3 times as big. Now we have to adjust the price of those insurance products and the distribution of those insurance products somewhere around plus or minus a few percentage points 3 times in order to adequately disincentivize social anxiety. And again, one reason that at least the United States of America is a good test case for what social angst is we will allow courts to review dozens and dozens or thousands of lawsuits to have a good understanding of what we're actually arguing about: retaliation, discrimination, you name it. But we see it in every country. And the reason Swiss Re and the other big reinsurers like SCOR in France or Munich Re in Germany or
Hmm.
you name it, why they're tracking these numbers is they set the price everywhere. So even though when people think about data in GDPR in Europe and they're thinking we can't collect data on enough people, it doesn't matter. We already know the price. Whether you can collect demographic data or not, we know how expensive it is for you to exist because you don't like your neighbor. And I'm not just talking about like you in particular, but a lot of us, we live in these cities and we don't know everyone in these cities. We don't get along. That's okay, as long as we're available to be cordial, respectful, and professional at work to get the job done. And then we
Hmm.
can go back to whatever our most comfortable silos are. I'm never suggesting that everyone needs to give everyone else a warm hug, but there's a price for a punch versus a hug. So yeah, we already know the price. It doesn't matter what data people are collecting. And all the data that we're trying to protect from a privacy standpoint per the GDPR is, per my colleagues, is already on the dark web anyway. Like I can find anybody right now. We already have all the data.
Yeah, and as you said, it's already being priced by Munich Re, Swiss Re, and all the other global reinsurance companies. And just for context of the listeners who are not familiar with the insurance industry, so usually you have your insurance company that you deal with, and they reinsure a whole bucket of risks that are similar with parties like Swiss Re or Munich Re or other reinsurance companies. I think there's one from Japan which slipped my mind.
Yeah, there's one everywhere. There's a million of them. Yeah,
There's one everywhere, and but though and Lloyd's of London is perhaps the best known reinsurance
they're
company
the most
because
important. Yeah,
um, and they actually put risks in buckets and then they buy policy there.
exactly.
So that they don't, the insurance companies don't have to pay you the full amount out of pocket, but they can actually recover some
Yeah,
from the reinsurance companies. That's the short of it.
they're trying to create a cultural buoyancy, right? The way I would communicate what reinsurance is for anyone not familiar, it's insurance for insurance companies. But the best way to look at it is kind of like the the Fed rate.
Mm,
It's the price with which an insurance carrier like a Zurich or a Chubb
mm,
can distribute the paper, the
mm,
actual insurance contract. And that price, like this 10% social inflation rate that I
mm.
mentioned, it has pervasive impact on certain types of insurance that corporations buy.
Yeah,
Um, and we
like.
closely monitor it. Oh, like directors and officers insurance, it usually gets triggered when someone sues the boss or
Hmm.
the boss messes up. Even if you're in a place that doesn't have a lot of litigation, let's say they're not suing, let's say you're in France
Yeah.
and you run a company in Marseille and you fail to meet their disability regulations and hire um, people with mobility issues, like people in wheelchairs.
Mm,
They'll let you go by with that, but they will fine you. So even when people go, we don't pay insurance, that fine is an insurance price. So all of these penalties, I think one big issue is we never talk about the insurance industry as being the biggest, oldest industry on the planet. It's bigger than banking, it's bigger than finance, it's older than finance. And without risk capital at the floor of all of our economies, there would be no capital markets, currency markets, bond markets, equity markets, you name it. They're all built on top of this initial agreement that we won't burn this place down tomorrow. And that's ultimately what we all want. In the past few hundred years of human history, we've seen, relative peace. I know there are wars happening here and there, but it's been relatively peaceful where we're sitting here doing podcasts and not worried about an axe flying by our head. At least I'm not
yeah.
worried right now. We'll see.
No. Let's keep it that way for
Yes, let's keep
at
it.
least for the next foreseeable period.
I need a couple of decades, and then
Yeah.
I just need to, yeah. But yeah, so we try to incentivize peace, and you know, capital, risk capital in particular, risk capital is just another code for insurance. It tames the beast because there is a certain level of miscommunication across every city, every company, every locale where, we don't always know each other. We don't always understand each other. Even people living in the same house have communications issues. And so we're going to encounter those. But how we say what we mean to say and work more cooperatively in our organizations, in our industries, in our economies, has an actual price. And so, yeah, back to your earlier question, I just think that this was one of my main problems, but we happen to be able to use economics to solve it. Most places where I go, I'm usually talking about lawyers, so I think people think that I'm a lawyer, but in my opinion, like, the lawyers are just the tools that we use. We can move them around the chessboard. Like, the economics is still the incentive for them to do their thing and argue for and advocate for human rights. Again, across every country. Um, so yeah, that is how we incentivize DEI, and yeah, the actual price of a lack of inclusivity, whatever DEI might mean, a lack of workforce resilience, a lack of operational excellence. Forget the language D, E, and I. The price of that, the price for a lack of that, is your insurance policy. Everyone should be aware of that because we always pay the bill. If your CFO went to school anywhere, they're paying grievances with insurance. They're never paying it with petty cash, or a credit card out of pocket. If they're wise, they may be insane and they may just go, I'll pay it with cash, but that's crazy.
Yeah. Okay. Um, so I think we touched already on a standard that is out there that I didn't know
Oh yeah.
until we started talking, um, which is an ISO standard,
Yeah.
which particularly deals with how DEI is built into companies, into systems. Can you tell a bit more about this?
Yeah. So the ISO standard is ISO 30415.
Hmm.
It took about 10 years to build, from around, I would say, 2011 to
Hmm.
2021, which again goes back to your earlier question. After I finished running for office, like, what do I do? How do I build this company?
Hmm.
I just happen to have unique knowledge of this standard because I was on one of the advisory boards. And for anyone not familiar with the ISO, just to give you a little background, the ISO, as formally existed, there are a few older European organizations that cater into it, like AFNOR in France, that are 100 years old. But the International Organization for Standards, or the ISO, or ISO as we call it for short, has been around for about 78 years, and they've written about 25,000 standards. Everything that we do well as a species across international and language borders and barriers has been arguably a standard at the ISO. So the textiles in your shirt and my shirt, is based on the ISO standard. The fuel in our vehicle is based on the ISO standard. The water flow rate in your building is an ISO standard. But also, more recently, manufacturing and quality control standards are ISO standard. Cybersecurity and how we help companies comply with the General Data Protection Regulation are an ISO standard. And if we take the last one that I mentioned, the cybersecurity standard, what we did about 10 years ago, especially in America after Europe published the GDPR, um, banking states like New York State created a cyber regulation where they use the ISO 27001 standard to audit all companies in cyber resilience because they were taking on too much risks, getting hacked and getting sued, or again around data and privacy rights, but also just ransomware attacks, et cetera. And so this particular standard for cyber, and I'm going to tie this into DEI, was leveraged to create basic infrastructure that all companies should have to show that they're a good risk. Because what was happening is companies were getting hacked and they would just call Zurich and say, give me more insurance.
Yeah.
But Zurich says, I'm not going to keep insuring you whether you keep having the same problem over and over again. So you need a firewall penetration test. You need a bring your own device policy. You need to train your employees on how to recognize a phishing email. If you can't do at least those three things, you're a bad risk. It's like wanting a driver's license, but not taking a driver's test. That's an insurance call. We don't trust you as a good driver. It's why in the United States, we'll lower your insurance premiums for driving cars when you're 25 because we don't trust people between 24 and 16 years old.
Yeah.
And I crashed a car at 16. You could not trust me at 16. I'm very cautious now. I don't like my 84-year-old father-in-law driving without me because he rides the brake too heavy. So again, trust and risk is a bell curve. Anyway, so if I take that cyber standard and what we did for fortifying companies from a technology management standpoint, and I move forward from 2017 to 2021,
Mhm.
we're doing the same thing for people management that we used to do for technology management. We think that there are certain infrastructure that complex organizations need to have in order to mitigate risks of people saying, I am aggrieved with regards to being retaliated against or discriminated against, period. And some of those infrastructural things are baked right into the standard. So the ISO standard for DEI is what we would call a functional standard. It assesses the function of a business. So it's not a what people normally think about with DEI. It's not about quotas or demographic data. First things first that it would like you to have is an onboarding structure for new employees that come, because everyone at your company, you may say, oh, they all look the same. They're all white men. Well, the people from Holland are different from the people from the UK who are immigrating here. The people with red hair versus the blonde hair versus the brunette hair, they may need different things. They may need different healthcare resources. They may different,
Yeah.
everyone who may seem like the same person is not necessarily the case. So companies need to have that onboarding infrastructure. Secondarily, they need to have what we call feedback mechanisms so that they can see whistleblowing when it happens and mitigate that risk. Or else, Lloyd's of London will say, you're a higher risk, or Swiss Re, or SCOR in France, or
Mhm.
Munich Re in Germany. So, to give the parameters of the standard, there are four big categories that this functional standard works in. The first
Mhm.
is governance,
Mhm.
that's things you do with your executives. The second is human resources, obviously, things you do with your employees. But the third is product delivery, whether your product is a service or something more tangible. So, whether you're delivering the service of consulting or whether you're making automobiles, this standard examines how you push inclusive practices into that. And last but not least is your supply chain.
Mhm.
So, supplier diversity, procurement is what it's called at most companies. It's not only just direct suppliers, the standard also accounts for what it calls other organizational stakeholders. So, these may be partners, peers that may affect your reputational risk. Let's say you're a soccer team and there's a company advertising in your stadium and they're a partner. They're not necessarily a supplier, but they could impact your reputational risk depending on who they are, what they represent, etc. You want to be able to factor all those things in. So those are the four big categories. They extrapolate out into 32 domains, and those 32 domains extrapolate out into 171 what we call elements. And those are essentially questions that we can translate into different types of insurance risks. So, based on your answers to these questions, we can score your maturity in those four categories,
Mhm.
meaning your maturity is infrastructure that you have, similar to the cyber reference I made, so that again, a Lloyd's of London or Zurich or you name it can say, okay, they're better than their peers. This is the best hospital I've seen, the best hospitality company I've seen, the best manufacturing company I've seen, and everyone else is a laggard. And that audit, based on the function of your company, not demographic data
Mhm.
is what incentivizes us to make a better evaluation of your price and how you engage people, no matter where they come from, that
Mhm.
work at your company. So that's
Is
how
that
this,
also how
yeah.
inclusion score works?
Yeah,
So
it's
you're
exactly
the
what an inclusion score. An inclusion score is essentially a maturity score based on the ISO standard that can be communicated to an insurance carrier. And
okay.
for anyone,
And then the higher the maturity, the lower your premium.
exactly, exactly. The better your, if you can parallel park, the better driver you are, the better insurance premium you have,
Yeah,
and that is
because
that
the
is the
risk
problem.
of loss is lower.
Exactly right. Like we think, in the United States, we see companies that with unions
Mhm.
are lower risk because they have a feedback, they have a buffer to, let's say you have an aggrieved employee. Let's say the biggest use case is women, because women in the workforce are 50 or more percent of the population.
Mhm.
Here in the United States, they're more educated than people who look like me, and but they're underpaid, and so their grievances are more normalized or at a higher volume than, say, ethnic minorities or disability or neurodivergence or age. All of these 27 protected classes are in, but the women category is the big one, obviously.
Mhm.
So let's say you have a woman aggrieved at a company, uh, and we just saw a case like this where this young woman was interning at a company, and she did a good internship. At the end, her male supervisor said, "Look, you did so good, such a good job. We'd love you to come in and work here full time after you graduate from." She was getting her MBA. And say, "Look, if you were a man, we would have offered you 50% more." That's illegal,
Yeah.
and it's illegal everywhere. It's illegal there, and it's illegal here. And it would be settled in two different ways in the EU versus the US. It'd probably be a lawsuit here, it'd be a fine over there, but both are an insurance premium price. So, yeah, we want infrastructure like to manage that, where when that woman blows the whistle and says, "I was offended
Mhm.
and this was illegal," if there's infrastructure, say, "Okay, we're sorry that this happened. Would you be willing to work with us through this employee resource group, through this affinity group, through this feedback mechanism so that it doesn't happen to the next person?" Instead of going to the next company, slapping us with a lawsuit and going on about your business. Like, we'll, take 2 weeks off, here's a couple of grand, but that's better than here's the annual salary and damages because you're emotionally distraught. We'd love for you to work with us on this problem as we gradually get better. And for the most part, anyone who's been working for more than a day, any 25-year-old or older, understands that the world isn't changing tomorrow, but they absolutely want that change and they're available to work on it. Instead of the company that has no infrastructure just goes, "We're going to get sued." So, insurance carrier just pay them. And then the Lloyd's market will go, "Well, no, no, Beasley, we'll pay it once." And I'll give you this example. Any company that has a claim right now, and this is what Swiss Re is, they're looking at the number of claims or suggested claims, even because some companies won't file a claim. It's just like when people crash their car, but they won't take it to the auto shop. They'll take it to their friend, pay in cash, so they don't
Yeah.
have to file a claim. We still see the payment, we track the payments at the mechanic. So it doesn't matter if you don't file a claim. We get in general where the claims would be in your area. We still see that there are angry people, even if you don't go to court. So we're tracking everything, and there's data there, and it doesn't need to be personal data for us to track it. So anyway, when that happens, um, your premium usually doubles. If you have a claim, it's double. Yes. If you don't have a claim, they're going up at a rate of about 20% a year. And the reason Swiss Re and other reinsurers are ringing the bell around this issue is because it's unsustainable, just like cybersecurity was in 2013, 14, 15. And then we came out with all these regulations around 16, 17. Yeah.
So is this then is DEI then something that will be enforced through the financial services system?
Always. I think everything, the only real incentive we ever have against sort of, what we see happening here in the United States is to show the CEOs that meet in Davos at the World Economic Forum that it is just absolutely too expensive to unconnect the world. To be overly philosophical, if I read all the old books from Western philosophy, Eastern philosophy, every religion, and I did this in a book I published back in 2012. We ran a series of word clouds to see what synonym rises to the top. And every preacher, whether they're Buddhist, Hindu, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, you name it, they were all talking about connectivity. It is apparently the meaning of life and the oldest wisdom that we have. As we exist in this interconnected world, and we see people migrating, whether it's through climate migration or just in general, whether they're moving to Holland or they're moving to Harlem. I live in Harlem, which is uptown Manhattan. I'm trying to find another word with an H. No matter where they're moving, um, people are coming together and connecting, and they create more economic activity there. They create more friction. They create more transactions. More energy proliferates. Like to use that analogy that friction is energy proliferation, but transactions is what gross domestic product is. For instance, when we see economic friction scale, it's because we're bumping up against each other and we realize, oh, you need something different than what I need. You buy this shirt, I buy that shirt. The market expands. We want to see that happen. At least everyone at the World Economic Forum, everyone at the United Nations, everyone at the EU. We want to see more of that activity. And the more conservative leaders try to decouple us, our best defense is for the financial sector to say, look, we can't afford it. You can decouple if you like, but we'll all be poorer and in more danger if we do decouple from each other. Anything other than people coming together and doing that not just philosophically but mechanically through finance and insurance
Mhm.
is antithetical to human existence. So yes, I think we'll see DEI enforced as a proxy of finance. It may not be the sexiest, loudest conversation, but I'll say this. I was just sitting with the COO of a large multinational insurance carrier, and all he could do, he was literally like salivating because all he could think of was, oh, this market should be 3 times as high. So he didn't, I don't even know if he's a moral actor, but
Mhm.
what he thinks is, I am leaving about $7 billion on the table. If the market grows, for instance, the employment practice liability market globally is about 7 billion.
Mhm.
The 10% Swiss Re number suggests it should be 21 billion, right?
Mhm.
So if you're a really big company, you think, well, at least one of those billions is mine.
Yeah.
That's what he's thinking.
Yeah.
He's not going, oh, we shouldn't tell that woman that if she was a man, she should get double. He doesn't know any better. He needs some training, which
Mhm.
is a part of the market that is a separate revenue stream, separate from that 21 billion, right? So he's thinking, there's a billion for me in premiums. There's another billion in training as we morph society into whatever the new version of it will be, right?
Mhm.
Which where all of your previous guests, benefit because they're interacting in these spaces, right?
Mhm.
That's a market. So yes, I think the market, if we incentivize it to be, I think capitalism is evolving itself into what I like to call inclusionism. It is just happening because of that inherent demand for connectivity. Everybody has been talking about connectivity for the past 5,000 years. And we've now baked it in to the mechanics of how we put value on the cluster of human lives. So,
So that's the good part about storytelling we've done over the past 5,000 years, and
yes, yes.
that
No,
that it's all about the communication and connectivity.
hence why we're here.
Yeah.
Yes. This matters more than anything else, right? Because if we weren't able to tell a story, like I tell this story everywhere. I was just in Chicago last week telling this story, and people were like, I never thought about it like that. And they all work in insurance. Like, yeah, because the story matters. The preacher, the professor, the whomever telling the story to make it all make sense is more powerful, more dynamic. You doing this podcast is arguably more important than just underwriting insurance. But to do both uh, would be very, dynamic, and we need more people doing both. This isn't just a market that I want to gobble up. I couldn't do it if I wanted to on my own, just because the world is too expansive. So we just try to encourage more people who are in professional liability to, you know, go this route, because it's not only a revenue opportunity, but it's a moral imperative. And one more thing I'll say about the correlation between this and cyber, because
Mhm.
we just put out a op-ed on it in Forbes, because we have a new state constitution here in the state of New York that is getting ready to be enforced. It has an equal rights amendment which enshrines DEI, separate from what Trump is doing in DC. And what we reference is the New York State cyber reg, when they realized cyber was becoming too risky. And I think this would be interesting financially for all of your uh, listeners. Is in 2010, the cybersecurity insurance market was only 600,000 US dollars. Tiny, like
Yeah,
nothing.
it's non-existent virtually.
Right. But in 10 years, by 2020, it was 10 billion. And that's the change. And so I think we'll see the same when we think about employment liability. It's going to likely grow by 3 or 4x. I don't know that it'll be, you know, as drastic as cyber because it already existed, but to grow from 7 billion to somewhere around 35 or so billion in 10 years means there's a huge cultural shift in how we've tried to integrate people, and we actually see that per migration patterns across the globe. So it's coming whether we want it or not, and the financial engineers of the world have to be prepared to price it in and communicate it to every other type of company everywhere. You know,
Yeah, that's where I actually want to go. Also, I think there's a huge business case for insurance companies to start tackling this. But let's say I'm a leader in an organization, and I think DEI is uh, either too important or too financially risky, and I want to get started applying with the ISO standard. Where
yeah.
do I start? How can I get started with this?
I think you. So I chair the first certifying body in the standard, but there are a few others. Actually, companies in Nordic countries like DMV, et cetera. But I would go to we call it the Diverse Inclusion Service Management Forum, or if anyone just Googles ISO 30415 DISM.com. That's a lot. That's a mouthful. We're aware. But I think you start with an audit so that you can plan what your 5-year strategy is. Because no one's going to do everything that they need to do in 6 months or 3 months, and that's where we were previously before the pandemic. Everyone's like, I want to fix everything today. We won't do that. This has to be a gradual strategy. Again, just like cyber or IT or manufacturing, we got a 10-year plan to get people familiar with both the risk that we're taking on by not being deliberately inclusive, um, and the financial impact of that. And what I would say, I publish a dumb equation about how executives or directors can make assumptions about this risk. And it's the price of your insurance premiums plus the price of those ad hoc programs that you may be doing now that don't actually work or they're not justified. I met a company that where the CEO, his kid came out as gay, and he called me and said, because I used to run the LGBT Chamber of Commerce over here, and I started some over there in the Scandinavian Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce. I think I did their first uh, event. It was in Sweden though, good to in Malmo. But anyway, and I was like, look, I love that you care about your kid and you want to do something, but this may not be the best use case because you don't have an employee resource group that identifies that way. When you do have other groups, you have disabled groups, you have women's groups, you get bigger bang for your buck there. And you
Mm.
can nurture and see if you can even build an LGBT identifying group in your company and then execute something. So sometimes CEOs are, just as silly as the rest of us. They see something on the news and they go, I want to change the world tomorrow. It's like, you can't do that. You can't do that tomorrow. I heard somebody after the George Floyd murder here in the United States go, oh, we need to hire more Black people that work with us. But they were in Canada on
Mm.
the far West Coast. And I was like, I love the sentiment, but no, Black people don't even live there. You don't need to do that. Like, you don't need to call me with that. So my point is, it's the price of your premiums plus the price of those ad hoc programs that may not work out for you, plus the price of at least one human resources position. We look at those people as risk managers. So if they're chasing the crisis that you have created, that's an extra expense. So let's say that's 60 so thousand euros for the HR person, another 20 to 40,000 euros in ad hoc programming. Plus, let's say you got a company with 500 employees, another 250,000 in premiums. And when you add all those up, you're looking at about 300, 350K of risk. And that can justify you saying, I'm going to spend 30 to 35 in the next calendar year to build my base so that we have an actionable program that we can use and communicate across every border via the ISO. I'm not just going to hire somebody to be creative because we
Mm.
don't know what we're doing. I'm an accountant, you're a lawyer, she's an engineer. We know how to do those things. We don't know how to do this thing.
Mm.
That's what the ISO is for. So I would say they can get started by, they can certainly call us at Inclusion Score. We're in 32 countries. And you start with an assessment and you start with the expectations that it's going to take a while. But this is a long term game because people are what drives any of our companies around. They're our customers and they're our employees. So we can't expect, oh, we can just change it overnight. That won't work.
No,
Yeah.
especially not in the supplier
Yeah.
part. That's going to be difficult. And
Yeah. I mean,
even the cultural change just takes
yeah,
time.
especially for the large ones. I would say one thing that's driving mid-sized companies to use the standard, especially in like the UK and Canada, is those that have one big client. And so that big client is telling their supply chain, you need to try to catch up. And they know it's going to take time, but that's really what drives the market. They're looking at who's in their supply chain. They want to be able to communicate to their consumers the ethical regard in which they produce their products and services. So it's a big driver separately from the government regulations. So yeah, I mean it's a new world, but we we have we do have a rigid understanding of what good people management is at this point. Like we know we have a lot of data. It's not like we don't know these things. And one more thing specific to what I mentioned earlier with maturity. When I say maturity model, everyone can Google this. If they Google CMMI for capability maturity model integration, it's an old methodology that is applied to the ISO standard, which is essentially a step by step tiered system where we understand what I mean when I say infrastructure, like what the levels of infrastructure are and who's more mature or who's more sophisticated. So none of this stuff is new. We're just compounding old best practices because we've been doing this for 78 years to understand what the risks are. Yeah.
Okay. So the first step is to do an audit
I would do an audit first.
and also to make sure that everyone understand that this is going to be, as one of my previous guests called it, a marathon and not a sprint.
Yes. It will be a marathon. Yeah, because a lot of people will come and go, well, we didn't change the world in 24 months. And it's like, that's not our objective. It's not even, it shouldn't even be companies' objective. I deal with people all the time and they talk about justice and morals. And in most countries, there are actual justice systems. So I don't think for profit companies should be allowed to screw up. They may mess up and break the law. The actual justice system will work on them. It's not your job to do that. Or it's not our job to tell companies what they should look like. The purpose of the standard and that audit is for companies to leverage it to understand who they actually are. It's about self actualization. As CEO, I should not assume who the people are in my company. I'll build places for them to tell me who they are. And for instance, for that CEO with the kid who wants to join the LGBT chamber, if the people at my company don't tell me that they are LGBT and or care about this, if they're not willing to identify, then I need to focus on the market isn't telling me to focus on that. I may need to focus on the Asian women that work for me or the disabled people that work for me or certain age groups that work for me, which are all adequate priorities. So, um,
So what I'm hearing you say is also to look for quote unquote market signals. So what you're really looking at what your employees are telling you. So if let's say your employees, your Hispanic employees are telling you, well, we feel slightly undervalued compared to, and we get less promotions, etc. That's maybe a better place
it's going to
to
be where you focus.
start if you do the inventory.
Yeah, because they may be the ones, even if it's not valid or real, if they feel that way, they may bring those grievances to the forefront, which creates the insurance risk, right? So once they tell you there may be a problem here, you go, I'm going to build more infrastructure there. So you're absolutely right. But the standard in those, there's a domain 7 called inclusive culture. That's where the employee resource groups exist. And it's not in HR, it's separate because these are external advisory boards.
Mhm.
Building those will help those people coalesce in a group to tell you how they feel, where then you rigidly are identifying that risk. And so an audit will help you do that. It will help you build that infrastructure if your company doesn't already have it. We know how to build that infrastructure.
Mhm.
Age old methodologies. You don't have to be creative and build something from scratch that doesn't work. Yeah, and you go from there. And again, it covers those three big price categories: premiums, ad hoc programs, and any troubleshooters, HR
Yeah.
people that you have chasing it down. So yeah, you build the base first, manage people's every executive should say this is going to be a marathon. I like what your previous guest is saying. Uh, and and you go from there. And I think what people will find is that this work satisfies a lot of aggrieved employees to let them know. I think most people who've had a job for a while, they respect that there is a plan more than you just going, we're going to do everything right now.
Mm.
They're just saying anything. In any other profession, there's a
Yeah.
plan.
Yeah.
So we need that. We need the plan. And it's a good, it actually, this is I think a bad word, but it pacifies a lot of the anxiety from some of those folks when they go, I don't love
Yeah.
it here, but I at least know that there's a plan.
Yeah. And at least they are being heard and
Exactly.
respected as which is basic human dignity.
Yes,
As
it
also
is.
part of the connection, to be honest, that you actually listen to people and
Exactly.
may, and then they, to your point, they can indeed not expect you to change it overnight, but
They're willing to bear with you. They're willing to work with you. It's
and it's even an invitation, I think, also to them to say, hey, listen, I need some help with this.
yeah, there are also great ways to identify your next generational leadership,
Mhm.
right? These advisory boards or focus groups, so everyone calls them something different, but they are great ways to better identify and nurture your talent and to even understand talent that you may not understand culturally. And then over time, you go, okay, I get what they mean, how they work. And now I can help promote them through, even though they normally do things differently than I would. It again creates a playing field for understanding. But it's just like any relationship. It's, when people ask, what makes this or that relationship work. Everything's cliche. You go, it's communication, it's how you stay married, etc. And it's not sexy when you say it. It's no secret. It's like we talk until we understand. And we normally don't start from understanding, but we talk. It's as old as time. Yeah, it really is.
So I want to talk a bit about future.
Mhm.
So let's say that inclusion score becomes a giant hit in the
Yeah,
next in 10 years from now.
sure.
What does the future look like for you then?
Um, Probably moving away and letting one of my colleagues run it. But I think if inclusion score is a juggernaut in the professionalization of DEI space, with insurance to boot. Um, I think my greatest goal with this company would be to, as you know, in my other career, I'm a bit of a data geek. And I think that the way our technology works is I have a system in place to understand how people's input impacts the broader productivity of our company. And so I want to relinquish my equity stake in the company, which is large at this point, but we're still a startup, to pay out a productivity dividend to everyone who interacts with us. I want to be able to set a precedent around equity for CEOs to be able to better distribute value to people who make their companies valuable. I think that right now we're in this loop of winner take all economics. And I think we can do a better job. I'm not saying that the boss isn't worth, 4, 5, 10 times what their employees are worth, but you're not worth 1,000 times. Right now, we really don't have a financial model to better distribute value to people. So I think what we have designed in an inclusion score is a stakeholdership class separately from shareholders who have invested in the company to pay out a data dividend for people who play on it. And I'll give you an example. If we get in a client at a large city, like Copenhagen or Atlanta, it makes us more valuable to a Detroit or a Toronto or Johannesburg because they're like, oh well, Copenhagen and Atlanta are doing it, and it changes our price point and our value. But there are people in those organizations feeding us input that gradually increase both the value of our tech and the changes in these insurance premiums. And I can run some really minor math to identify how we distribute value back to them. I think every company should be working like that. Again, I'm not, it's not egalitarian per se, but it is more on the level of equity. I think that CEOs overvalue themselves and their capabilities. When people come to me, or even when you asked me the earlier question about with the little boy being pressed, I just think that what I do is within my capable wheelhouse. And a lot of people may go, well, I'm impressed with what you're doing. But I'm like, but this is just what I do. And so it shouldn't be overvalued. I shouldn't be worth 1,000 times what my stakeholders or employees are just because this is my skill set. I have no life, I have no kids, and I just work all day. But I'm fine to do it. For people who are doing other things, they should be indemnified for what they do well as well. So that's where I would
I,
love to be in 10 years. Go
okay,
ahead.
so I have a question about leadership and about the fact that CEOs are really valued at 1,000 times a regular employee. Does that also feed into the expectation that bosses will solve any problem for me? So that does that also increase sort of feeling of dependency instead of if you make the difference less big,
That's a
like
great question.
maybe 4 or 5 times, that people start to think, hey, but I have influence,
Yes.
and I get paid.
Yes. I think bringing equity somewhere closer to where it actually should be versus where it is, it it creates again more codependence on each other, which we want. We want that web of that. But it also dilutes the sense of elitism. Like there are people that I know. right here in Manhattan in New York City who truly believe that they have earned the centimillions or billions that they have. And I've come across, quite a few billionaires here. It's not uncommon, at least here in this city. And a lot of, the big cities, London, Paris, etc. Their general understanding of where everyone else is as though they are ignorant and lowly. I mean, we're all ignorant about something.
Mhm.
But their general sense is that these people, I think, as they grow in their wealth accumulation, they start to develop this disdain for everyday people. And again, it's antithetical to those old storytellers, to those
Mhm.
meanings of life. So I think your question is spot on. And I think as we lower their take home equity versus everyone else's, it it better incentivizes cooperation and inclusion in the organization. And the idea, and you're right, that people that they have an ally in the executive suite. Because right now people feel like those folks are unaddressable.
Yeah, they are from another planet, almost
They're from another
literally.
planet. They go to space. They're
Yeah.
not normal people. And you see people. Even I have to do a lot of work when I'm around and I'm in a suit and I'm out meeting people or shaking hands, and people, they treat you away like you're exalted. And you're like, no, I had to brush my teeth just like you today. I don't wake up. It's not that great when I roll over, but I'm better by 9 o'clock. You know what I mean? But they just go like, oh, you're amazing. It's like, no, no, no. I mean, like I am, I'm good. I'm good at what I do. I'm looking good, yes, but I'm not wildly extraordinary. I'm not Superman. I'm not Hercules. And so, yes, we have to do that to normalize our interaction. But right now, and it goes back to property. Now, I know this is a bit off topic, but when we talk about GDPR and data, et cetera, I think that we have a new class of property that we can distribute. So if I clock people's input to my company's productivity, I can give them per that data, that tracking, I can offer them that as a piece of property. And that is what I tie value to distribute them that value. So they can say, look, I have property just like you have property, and we have some shared valuable value. It is more valuable together
Hmm.
than apart, but I am certainly a piece of the equation. I am 30% if you are 70%, or we're 50-50, or whatever it may be. But we need that to disincentivize the abuse of power. And abuse of power doesn't just happen at the macro nation state space. It happens person by person, cubicle by cubicle, organization by organization. So yeah, I just want to disincentivize that. And if it doesn't change the world, it's fine. But I just want to demonstrate that it is possible, and that a CEO doesn't have to take a pat on the back and go, "I'm going to take $100 million off the table here and go to some remote island." It's ridiculous.
So another question about the future. Let's imagine it's 2032, and at least tech has seen the light, and they're truly inclusive. They are the highest on in terms of maturity on the CMMI level, CMMI level 5, I think it is.
Sure, sure.
What has changed, and what got us there?
I think if that happens by 2032, there may be some AI at play that is trying to make more logical sense. Um, but I honestly think, we're in for a tug of war with people who have accumulated a lot of value and a lot of power. I use those words intentionally, um, to be able to claw some back and distribute it to its rightful owners. So I do think that around this time in the 2030s, we'll have a good idea of what's possible and how, again, equity should be distributed and how it can foster a sense of belonging, how we can solve for belonging. But I think that there will be a movement afoot, and I think we see it right now with what's happening in America and in other places, where there is a conservative faction that is absolutely terrified of the the differentiation and onboarding of people across the globe. And so I think that we are going to have to weather a storm of a wave of conservatism, if you will, in the latter part of this decade on into the 2030s in order to get to where we're going. But I don't think that we're like at the end of it. I think we're at the beginning of a new era, mainly because women have been in the workforce and have had bank accounts, at least in the United States of America, for the past 53 years. That's a
Mm.
radically new thing.
Yeah.
Um, and
Voting rights are even maybe a century, a bit over a century old.
yeah,
That's what
everything
a
is
lot of
very
people forget, how much change we've seen in the last century or so, and it hasn't come like easy.
right. It's not
But
gonna be easy, right? So I am optimistic about humanity. I think we're resilient. Even if there was some terrible type of war, some people will be here later, and I am confident that whether it's over a short time or a long time, that they will realize our potential to be connected and get along. Number one, but number two, I think that we have to go through this conservative wave because the rate of change is increasing.
mhm.
People don't like change management. I learned that when I started working in change management immediately. But it's going to happen. In these past 100 years, we've existed for 200,000 years, and only in these past 150 have things been radically and rapidly transitioning. So, and I hear people talk about the good old. This is kind of a tangent. I had this young man in one of my classes at the University of Georgia, and he's like, I think he's really young and activist. He said, I think we're at the end of an era. These are bad times. And I was like, kid, you haven't even been around long enough. We're at the beginning of something new, especially in this country, because I was like, look, we saw these two women, Hillary and Kamala, get really close to the most powerful position in our country twice. And everyone thinks because they didn't get over the hump, it's a big failure. But I'm like, the fact that they even got this close is a big win. And it says a lot about the corporate world because these are lawyers, these are business women who came to their political professions later. And we see it across the board. Every company I know that is run well, that has sort of an ethical regard in that middle rung, it's being executed and delivered by educated women. So we're in a really new place, and it shouldn't be slighted. We need to remember our history. We just got here. We just got here. You know, my grandparents were around during World War II. Like and they're still here. My grandmother is still here, so it's not that far removed from us.
How do they look at you, at the work you're doing?
They are impressed. They're not like that 10-year-old little boy. They kind of act like those other people where they sort of treat you like you're um, too good to hang out with them, and I have to constantly um, bring them back to reality and let them know that that my breath also stinks.
Hmm.
That's the only way to
Yeah,
fucking
that you have to put on a clean undie
pant
every
leg
morning.
one leg at a time, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think they think what I do is radical. I think a lot of their lives have been guided in fear, especially when I think about my mother, my grandmother. Um, but I think they're excited to participate. I work a lot with my mother, for instance. She knows that something is possible. She just doesn't know necessarily what it is, but she expects me to go and figure it out. She's like, I paid for you to be educated, so fix things. So I really just work for her. I just work for, yeah. We work for the old people. Yes,
That sounds like a great place to close. Um, James, thanks very much for an amazing conversation.
thank you.
If people want to learn more about you or about the inclusion score or about the ISO standard, where would you like to send them? Oh, and please tell them about this Chat GPT part,
Yeah,
which I used by the way
you
to
did.
prep your
Oh, right.
questions. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I would just go to inclusionscore.org, everything is there, and it'll take you to all the other places. But yes, we do have a new GPT app called inclusionscore.ai. If you go to that site, you can build systems and ask questions in the standard that cater to whatever you need. For instance, we just published a new index. We've been indexing the FTSE and the DAX and the S&P 500 in that AI. But yeah, I would just go to inclusionscore, one word.org, and all of our stuff is there. And yeah, we'd love to talk to everybody about the price of exclusion
And the price of inclusion.
and the price of inclusion and the price of inclusion. Yes,
Okay,
how we bring that price of exclusion down through deliberate equity and inclusion. Yeah.
great. And people can connect with you on LinkedIn, I suppose.
Yes, I may have to delete some people. I'm at that 30,000 cap.
Ah,
But yes, I would
well, they can follow you.
follow, yeah, add me on LinkedIn, follow me, message me. But I'm everywhere. I'm on, I'm still on X, even though it's crazy. I'm Facebook. If you go to jamesfeltonkeith.com, a lot of my other stuff is there. The book tour that we're currently doing and where we'll be speaking next. Um, yeah, either jamesfeltonkeith.com or inclusionscore.org. Connect with me everywhere. I respond. I'm on all the social media platforms. I'm a bit of a tech fanatic. I wake up and look at my phone. I know it's probably bad, but I do it anyway. So
Yeah, we all have to do something.
we have to do
Uh,
something. It's my only sport. It's the only thing I can play well is technology. So yeah, I'm here.
Great. We'll include those links in the show notes.
Yep.
James Felton Keith, thanks
Thanks so
again
much.
for an amazing conversation. Listeners, thank you very much for listening. And until the next episode, keep being awesome. Well, that's a wrap for episode 105 of Women Disrupting Tech with James Felton Keith on building inclusion into capitalism. James and I hope that you found our conversation as empowering and inspiring as we intended it to be. And if you'd like to learn more about or connect with James and or the Inclusion Score, please head over to the show notes for a link. As usual, you can find the show notes at womendisruptingtech.blog. When you've enjoyed listening to this episode, please follow the podcast on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. Following Women Disrupting Tech is a great zero-cost way to support James and my other guests in making inclusion in tech the new normal by the end of 2032. You can also follow Women Disrupting Tech on social media. On LinkedIn, you can follow at The True Story Company, and on Instagram, YouTube, and Substack, where they are under at Women Disrupting Tech. For in-depth stories and behind-the-scenes insights about each episode, you can head over to Substack, where I also share trends that I've identified over the past 100 episodes. So don't forget to subscribe on Substack for more Women Disrupting Tech. Finally, if you want to connect with me, you can reach me via Dirk-Jan at womendisruptingtech.blog, and you can also send me a DM on Substack or LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, simply search for my name and you'll find me. With that, I wish you a wonderful day. I hope to see you in the next episode, and until then, keep being awesome.